The decision reflects Turkey's dependence on imported energy and its need to ensure a steady supply of gas for its citizens as winter approaches. Officials in Ankara have made it clear that they cannot afford to risk energy shortages during the colder months. Turkey's energy minister addressed the issue with candour, saying, "The winter season is approaching and we have agreements with Russia. We cannot tell our citizens that there is no gas. Therefore, we need to receive gas from Russia, Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan." Good evening. I'm bringing you this in-depth special report on what could be one of the most consequential diplomatic turns in the Middle East in years. United States President Donald Trump has made a dramatic declaration that Hamas is ready for a lasting peace, a phrase that only months ago would have sounded inconceivable. In a carefully staged video address from Washington, Trump not only praised the countries that supported his efforts, but also did something unprecedented since returning to office in January. He openly called on Israel to stop bombing Gaza. The statement electrified the region and reverberated across world capitals. Speaking with the air of a man determined to own the moment, Trump said, "I want to thank the countries that helped me organize this. Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and so many others. So many people fought so hard. This is a great day. We'll see how it all turns out. We have to make the final decision. Everyone was united in wanting this war to end and to see peace in the Middle East. And we are very close to achieving that. Everyone will be treated fairly." These words were more than just ceremony. They were carefully chosen to signal a shift in Washington's approach. Until now, Trump had stood firmly by Israel's right to defend itself after last year's escalation with Hamas. Yet on this Friday, he became the first American president in decades to tell a sitting Israeli government, in effect, the bombing must stop. The reason, he said, was the willingness he now saw in Hamas to negotiate not just a ceasefire, but the release of every hostage. The breakthrough came after weeks of back-channel talks involving an eclectic mix of mediators: Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Jordan. Trump credited them by name. He said the coordination had been intense and often personal. At one point, he remarked, "So many people fought so hard. We were given a tremendous amount of help. Everybody was unified in wanting this war to end and seeing peace in the Middle East, and we're very close to achieving that." Perhaps the most poignant moment of his address came when he spoke directly about the hostages held in Gaza. His voice briefly wavered as he said, "I look forward to having the hostages come home to their parents and having some of the hostages, unfortunately, you know the condition they're in, come home likewise to their parents because their parents wanted them just as much as though that young man or young woman were alive." Those words captured the human dimension of a conflict that has for too long been reduced to military statistics. Shortly after Trump's remarks, Hamas issued its own statement describing the US president's call for Israel to stop bombing as encouraging. The group said it was prepared to immediately negotiate the release of all hostages under the ceasefire framework presented at the White House earlier in the week. For an organization long branded as a terrorist movement by the United States and Israel, this was a remarkable declaration, though one met with skepticism in parts of Israel's political establishment. Trump made it clear this was not an open-ended dialogue. In his own unmistakable style, he posted on his Truth Social account, "An agreement must be reached with Hamas by Sunday evening at 6 p.m. Washington, D.C. time. Every country has signed on. If this last chance agreement is not reached, all hell, like no one has ever seen before, will break out against Hamas." That post instantly dominated headlines worldwide. It underscored both the urgency and the risk of the initiative. By setting a public deadline just 2 days away, the president effectively put Hamas, Israel and the mediators on notice. Either accept the framework or face the consequences. Within hours of the ultimatum, a significant development came from Gaza. Hamas leaders announced their willingness to release all hostages if the United States-backed ceasefire terms were adopted. The announcement was relayed through Qatari channels and confirmed by multiple diplomatic sources. For families of the hostages, some of whom have endured months of uncertainty, it was the first real glimmer of hope. In Jerusalem, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office issued a short but telling statement. Israel was preparing for the immediate implementation of the first phase of President Trump's plan to release all hostages. That phrasing suggested that Israeli officials, while still cautious, were willing to at least test the process Trump had set in motion. Behind the scenes, Israeli military planners reportedly began drawing up operational guidelines for a potential pause in airstrikes to facilitate the hostage handover. The Israel Defense Forces leadership remains wary of Hamas's intentions, but pressure from Washington, combined with a rare sense of international unity, appeared to be influencing the conversation in ways not seen before. For ordinary people in Gaza, the president's words offered a distant but tangible sense of relief. For months, the enclave has endured relentless bombardment, the destruction of homes and hospitals, and a humanitarian crisis that aid agencies describe as catastrophic. Trump's explicit demand for Israel to halt the bombing, "We want this war to end and to see peace in the Middle East," resonated on streets where many had begun to believe the world had turned its back on them. The announcement also triggered a wave of reaction from across the Arab and wider Muslim world. In Cairo, officials welcomed what they described as a necessary course correction. In Riyadh, the Saudi foreign minister said the kingdom would support any plan that saved civilian lives and preserved regional stability. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, long a vocal critic of Israeli military action in Gaza, called the Trump initiative a step that should have been taken earlier. Even Jordan, which has often walked a delicate line in its relations with both Israel and the Palestinians, signalled cautious optimism. In Washington, the mood was more complex. Congressional leaders reacted along partisan lines. Republican hawks warned that halting the bombing could give Hamas time to regroup, while Democrats generally praised the president's focus on diplomacy and humanitarian relief. Analysts noted that for Trump, who has often portrayed himself as a deal-maker rather than a conventional diplomat, this episode could become a defining moment of his second term. As part of his public remarks, Trump emphasized fairness. "Everyone will be treated fairly," he declared, framing the proposal not merely as a strategic calculation, but as a moral commitment. This language was clearly intended to reassure Palestinians that their grievances would not be ignored, while also assuring Israelis that security concerns would be addressed. Footage from Gaza in recent days has shown militants from the Ezzedine al-Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, parading through city streets while civilians, including children, looked on. These images, juxtaposed with the president's call for a truce, highlight the fragile nature of the moment, the coexistence of defiance and despair, of militancy and the longing for normal life. For families of the hostages, many of whom have staged vigils outside the Israeli parliament in Jerusalem and held emotional meetings with US envoys, the stakes are deeply personal. Trump's direct mention of parents waiting to embrace their sons and daughters, some alive, some presumed dead, struck a chord. It served as a reminder that behind every statistic in this conflict lies a human story. The Sunday deadline looms as a test of wills and credibility. Diplomats describe the hours ahead as a race against time, with negotiators working to turn statements of intent into a binding agreement. International observers say that if Hamas follows through on its pledge to release the hostages and Israel reciprocates by suspending the air campaign, the region could witness the first substantial reduction in violence in many months. Critics remain sceptical. Some Israeli security officials warn that Hamas may use the ceasefire to regroup militarily. Certain Palestinian factions distrust Trump's motives, suspecting that his plan could still favour Israel in subsequent political arrangements. Human rights advocates stress that lasting peace will require not just the cessation of hostilities, but also meaningful steps toward addressing underlying grievances, including the blockade and the status of Palestinian territories. Yet for now, the focus is squarely on the deadline and on the possibility that for once the cycle of violence might be interrupted by an unexpected convergence of interests. President Trump's declaration, Hamas's response, Israel's guarded readiness, and the chorus of regional mediators together suggest that a window, however narrow, has opened for diplomacy. Whether it leads to a historic breakthrough or collapses under the weight of mistrust and competing agendas will depend on decisions taken in the coming hours. In his own words, Trump described the moment as very special, maybe unprecedented in many ways. As the world waits to see if his bold gambit will succeed, the eyes of millions remain fixed on Gaza, Jerusalem and Washington, hoping that what began as a simple call for an end to bombing might evolve into the first steps toward a more enduring peace.